Good evening. Welcome to tonight's Commonwealth Club World Affairs program. My name is Emily Hoven. I'm an opinion columnist and editorial writer at the San Francisco Chronicle, and I will be your moderator for tonight's discussion. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers. We have District Attorney Brooke Jenkins, Dante... Should have left some room for applause. Dante D. Jones and Vincent O'Bannon. So Brooke Jenkins is the 31st District Attorney of San Francisco. She was first appointed in 2022 and elected by voters in 2022 and again in 2024.
Unanimously.
She leads the San Francisco District Attorney's Office with a focus on public safety, victim advocacy, and the responsible implementation of criminal justice reform. She's been actively engaging with incarcerated people at San Quentin Rehabilitation Center as part of her work on criminal justice reform. She launched the Healing, Reform, and Reentry Partnership, which brings her and staff from the DA's office into the prison to listen to men who are incarcerated about what supports and programs could help reduce future crime and improve rehabilitation outcomes. Dante D. Jones was just released from San Quentin Rehabilitation Center. After serving 17 years of a 39 years to life sentence, he was released by way of PC 1170D, the resentencing law. Now free, Dante is dedicated to amplifying the voices of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people and continuing the work of justice and humanization through media and advocacy. And last but not least, we have Vincent O'Bannon, who is a justice-impacted advocate and reentry professional whose work centers on prosecutor-led criminal justice reform, community safety, and pathways to accountability. Following his release from incarceration in 2025, Vincent committed himself to rebuilding his life through consistent employment, civic engagement, and collaboration with justice system stakeholders. So, thank you everyone for being here, and we will now start with the question and answers. So we're gonna start off with District Attorney Jenkins. What motivates you to keep returning to San Quentin Rehabilitation Center?
Well, there's many reasons. First and foremost, the way that it began was me wanting to really introduce lawyers in my office to the power of transformation, to what it looks like when we sentence someone to a prison term, how people can change their lives. I can tell them each and every day, right? You can have somebody read something in a book, read an article in the paper about what change looks like and how people can transform themselves and rehabilitate themselves, but it's very different than if you sit alongside them and actually talk to them about the work that they've done on themselves. I need my lawyers to remember that yes, people make mistakes, but it doesn't mean that their lives should be over or that the rest of their lives should be spent behind bars. We have to believe that people can gain insight and change the way that they think and come back to us in a healthy way. The other part of it was to talk to them about intervention and prevention strategies. One thing that I really thought about when I became DA is that every DA's office is built on being reactionary. We are who step in after a crime is committed in order to charge the person with the crime. But public safety at its core is preventing victimization in the first place. And to do that, we have to be able to intervene and we have to be preventative. And so I launched an initiative called Access to Hope in my office that is centered around both intervention and prevention work and reentry for people coming out of the system. But we can't sit at the table in my office and decide what those strategies should be. We need to talk to the people who, ended up on the wrong path about what might have changed, what could have been done to change the path that they were on, what parts of the system when they had early touches worked and didn't work, because using the information from them is what informs the best strategies. And so that's really what this was about.
Great, thank you. So on to Vincent and Dante. I'm curious if you can share a little bit more about how you got to your sentence. Was it imposed by the court? Was it imposed by the district attorney? What was the role of counsel in your in the decision?
Oh, well, yeah, so for me, so in 2007, I was convicted of attempted murder. Right? My victim was named Christian Starr. So I grew up in a time where, I grew up under violence and, trauma, strife. My path or my conflict resolution, all I knew was violence. That's how we grew up. That was our conflict resolution, right? So end up going to court. I got sentenced 12, what would take 12 in the box, right? Jury found me guilty of attempted murder. They sentenced me to 39 years to life. I had what was called what we call a, excuse me, I'm having flashbacks here.
No, you're good. Yeah, take your time. Yeah.
What we call a dump truck, right? So in the legal system, a lot of us, when you have a public defender, or we call them public pretenders sometimes, they dump trucks, right? However, it took me a long time to recognize my wrongdoings and how I was involved and what made me get 39 years to life, so it took a long time, but we'll get back to that later. But yeah, to answer your question, it was a jury trial, and the judge had pretty much no choice but to sentence me to 39 years to life, because at that time there was no discretion for the judge to do what the DA was talking about, think about what led up to the crime and all the causative factors. You got found guilty. The judge had no choice but to follow the law and sentence you. So,
thank you for that. Yeah, Vincent, how about for you?
So I was sentenced in 2009 in Santa Clara County for 4 counts of commercial burglary and 1 count of unauthorized use of a credit card, something like that. I was sentenced by a judge. I received a 28-year and 4-month to life sentence as a third striker. My strikes were, at that time, 20 and 30 years past, respectively. It was a hard pill to swallow, but something good came out of it. I'm here today as a man who has come a 180-degree circle to become a better person, the person that outside of my criminal mind I should have been without the criminality. Today, I'm an advocate for victims' rights, reform, DA-initiated reforms, and just being of service. So yeah, that was my pathway.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's a lot to process. I'm curious, District Attorney, if you could talk a little bit more about how going into San Quentin has impacted the types of decisions that you and your office make and specific reform efforts that you might consider or think more about.
Well, I saw some facial expressions when Vincent mentioned his sentence, and I shared that reaction when I first heard it the first time we met in San Quentin. And I've had that reaction a number of times when we sit in a circle when I'm there and hear various sentences from around the state, out of other counties in particular. But also, when I heard Vincent's, it wasn't even so much that I thought it was disproportionate to other counties. It was the fact that I did not know until I met him that 3 strikes reform was not retroactive, right? And I'd been a prosecutor for a decade before that and still didn't realize. And so I think for me, going in over and over again and having those conversations every time you meet someone new who has a new situation that shows you a new part of the system that we need to work on, that illustrates the disparity in the way that people are sentenced across this state, which shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be where you are born that determines, or where you happen to be living at the time you commit your crime, that determines whether you spend 15 years in prison or your entire life, right? The rest of your life. And that's what we were seeing over and over again. And so that was part of it. The other part is, when you're there, you talk to them about prison conditions, you go on a tour, you see other things. And so we got to talking not only during our symposiums, but started to branch out after being invited by some of the residents to their civic engagement group, which is a legislative body inside the prison, where residents come together and come up with legislation concepts and ideas, mostly related to prison reform or victims' rights, and pitch it to elected officials to push through the legislature. And so blending both what we took away from symposiums and what we took away from meeting with the civic engagement group, we started to really come up with concepts that, adopt concepts that they had come up with about prison reform. Specifically in this regard, it was a single cell pilot program. So almost every inmate in California State Prison shares a cell with another inmate. In San Quentin, there's one exception, which is an earned living unit. So people who have demonstrated good behavior for a period of time can earn their way into a unit that allows you your own cell. But that is a small fraction, right, of how people live there. And there's so much cellmate on cellmate violence that happens. There's murders that happen. There are rapes. There are all kinds of things that take place. Not only that, but when you are fearful of that, you are more hypervigilant. You are not sleeping well. And so understanding the impact that lack of sleep has on your ability to program effectively, towards your rehabilitation, but also makes you more irritable and more likely to get into it with somebody that then leads you to getting written up, which can affect your ability to get paroled or resentenced, right? There's this domino effect. And so wanting to take some of the information that we got from them to really push for more of them to have the opportunity at having their own cell and being able to get more quality sleep and focus on their own rehabilitative journeys. Unfortunately, I'm sure we'll get into it, but that bill did not pass in the legislature, which is shocking to me still. And the other concept that came out of working with the civic engagement group that did pass and was signed by the governor recently is a victims' rights bill, because they identified for us that most of the money that they were paying out of their, the money that they earn for work, or half of the money that's put on their books by family members and friends, that was supposed to be going to restitution to victims, was actually going to the state to pay court fines and fees. Mm-hmm. And so they identified that for us too. Again, things that we who had been doing these jobs for decades didn't know. And so we put forth a Restitution First bill that, again, born out of San Quentin, that now ensures by law that victims are entitled to restitution first, not the state to its fines and fees, when that money is being garnished from any inmate in the California Department of Corrections. So, it was really, I don't even know the word to describe the experience of being able to take all of that information from them and turn it into legislation that, one of which passed and another which I haven't given up on, but, hopefully we can pursue in the future.
That's great, and it's amazing to see that lead to direct change. I actually went to San Quentin last year as well, and it's very interesting to be in the prison, see what's going on, talk to the folks there. And there are some changes going on at San Quentin in regard to new buildings and some of the governor's plans. Dante, Vincent, I'm curious if you can talk more about some of the institutional changes going on at the California Model Initiative, how that's impacting you, how that impacted your journey at San Quentin, kind of, I guess, the reverse of what the DA answered in terms of how things happening at the state level are kind of trickling back down to experiences in the prison, in San Quentin.
There's a lot of things, good things that are going on in San Quentin, but I guess it all depends on your perspective, right?
Talk about the California model.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I'm getting
and the impacts, yeah.
So I'm getting there. So the California model came about, for those who don't know, when the governor went to Norway, something like that, Norway. He went to Norway to see how they were doing their prison system because I guess, Norway passed laws and legislation in order to fix their prison system, right? They were, it took them 30 years to get it together and get it right, but like they have a whole system to where incarceration looks nothing like it does in the States, right? It's all about rehabilitation, humanizing both the victims and the perpetrator, right? So he wanted to be able to implement that here in California. So he came up with the California model. So and he started at San Quentin because San Quentin is one of the oldest prisons in the state. So that's how it came about. So it's a lot of things that's going on there. They gave the San Quentin about $300 million in order to build a new facility there, to expand the programs. So, there's a lot of good and bad that goes with it, right? You have advocates for it. You have advocates you got adversaries that's not really against the California model, but think that, those funds could have been allocated elsewhere to help, do different things. But me personally, I wasn't too much affected by the California model itself because I happened to come home, right? So the California model in its essence has not been truly implemented yet. We don't know what it's going to really be, right? The California model, the way the governor was pretty much talked about, it kind of been going on in San Quentin as far as the programming, people coming in and out, trying to, volunteers and, all those things kind of been going on. But now it's widespread and known, like, that this new way of looking at incarceration is happening here first at San Quentin to see how this pilot program thing works. But I don't know, I can go on forever with this, but I'm not like going to. I don't want to incite people, so
I'll jump in. So for me, the California model is a good concept. However, I don't think you can fix a system from the top down.
Yeah.
It has to come from the bottom up, which is things like Madam DA is doing, coming inside, speaking to those of us that it's actually affecting, getting our views and opinions on what is needed to not only change the system, but to also help with the victims' rights advocacy. Because there's a lot of us in there doing the work, and we're not doing it because we want to get out of prison. We're doing it because we're changed. We are not our crime. So the things that we do to get out, we are doing it wholeheartedly to come back into society as better individuals. So the California model is, as I say, a good concept, but I don't think anything can be changed from the top down. It's the worker bees, the people on the ground who has to be the ones to actually work towards remodeling a system that's pretty much broken.
I love that take, actually. And kind of going back to some of the issues, maybe at the state level, top down, you were alluding to some of the challenges getting bills passed in Sacramento. I'm curious if you can talk more about what specifically you ran up against last year with the single cell prison bill, if you had any lessons from that you'll take into kind of this next attempt. Yeah.
Ooh, I learned a lot, which is I'll never run for the state legislature, but that's a whole different thing. First and foremost, I think I took for granted that everybody would agree on this. I mean, it seemed so common sense that you would want to give people a more humane living environment who are incarcerated, that, and certainly with, the politics in Sacramento, I assumed that we wouldn't run into opposition for something that, like I said, seemed so fundamentally basic to somebody's human right to something like sleep. But what I took away was, and let me just explain how it traveled through. So it passed in the state assembly with only one vote of opposition, which was a single Republican vote. It made it therefore to the Senate, the state Senate. It passed unanimously through the Senate Public Safety Committee and then goes to appropriations. And while it was in appropriations, well, actually, when we were in the assembly, there was no opposition at all. When we arrived at the Public Safety Committee, suddenly opposition popped up. And I was a bit surprised that it, was reformers, who were actually the opposition, some of which I think would consider themselves prison abolitionists, so don't believe that prisons should exist at all, and therefore did not want to see any funding go to expanding prison cells or, prison facilities, which this bill wasn't actually going to do. It was going to, take already existing facilities and redistribute how people were put in them. But there was this belief that this was going to mean that prisons were expanding and there was going to be more funding to incarcerate people. The second thing is, and this is just my takeaway, it's not anything that was ever explicitly said, was that there seemed to be an issue with who was sponsoring this bill, i.e. me. That, it's hard to accept that a district attorney, and of all people, this district attorney who helped recall a progressive DA would be championing something like prison reform. And so I think that there was this belief that this shouldn't be my lane. This is not a lane that I should occupy. My whole message was, at the end of the day, this isn't about me, right? You could put me in the shadows. This is about men who are suffering, right, in these conditions. If you've ever been in a prison cell inside of a California prison, they are quite small. Most people who have a sibling would say you could barely share a room with your sibling who you're related to, let alone, growing up, let alone be put in a cell with a complete stranger who's on their own journey, right, after having committed a violent crime, and now you're supposed to be housed together and immediately like that get along. Right? Somebody who might be suffering from a mental health issue or PTSD or whatever is going on with them. And now we're supposed to co-locate you in the tiniest cell you can imagine and think you're going to coexist peacefully. And so I think for me, I said, this is about them, right? And can we prioritize them over ourselves, over our agendas, over our identities, whoever we are? And so, yes, I think, now it's about coalition building. It's about helping people become comfortable with the idea that a DA actually cares, right, about people who are incarcerated. It's like I get it. It's not your normal partnership. We laugh about this all the time when I'm inside San Quentin. It's the most uncharacteristic partnership you'd ever imagine, but it's where the best work gets done. Because who better to fix the system than the person responsible for running the system and operating the system? It has to come from the people who have the power to change it. And so I think that's the biggest lesson I learned is you don't take it for granted, right? Politics is always at play. Different agendas are always at play, but you keep at the forefront what the mission is and what you're trying to achieve, and you don't give up. And I haven't given up on it yet. I know these guys are out, but there's still a lot of people that they left behind in there who, deserve to have the right experience while they have to be in there.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really interesting segue into our next question for Vincent and Dante. I mean, so single cell occupancy is sort of one idea. Are there any other ideas that come to mind for you that would foster lasting rehabilitation that could be done on either behalf of the inmates themselves or the institutions at large? Are there any other ideas that would kind of create a better culture for rehabilitation?
So I believe one of the things that's working right now are the CBOs, and those are all community-based organizations who are coming in and helping to. They're advocating for us. They're also bringing in ideas and giving us tools to work with to be able to come back out as better people. As I mentioned earlier, I mean, this is a system that has been in operation for years and decades. So it's going to take, I think it's going to take the work that we are actually doing right now to make a change, because this type of work hasn't been done before. The things that Madam DA is doing right now, the things that different organizations are coming into San Quentin. You have Berkeley Journalism School coming in. You have all different types of organizations that are contributing to making incarcerated men and women better people. So it's slowly, it's coming about slowly, but things are changing for the better with the advocates who are currently and probably who come following the ones who are doing the work now to make it, to really not, I don't want to say close the prisons, because prisons are needed.
Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, they are needed. But for the work that the men and women are doing inside to become better people, that is going to help make jobs like Madam DA's easier to accomplish, if that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, so maybe put a finer point on it. I know there have been debates in Sacramento about wages for those who are performing labor in the prisons, questions about how correctional officers are staffed, trained. I don't know if you have any thoughts on some of those topics as well. Well,
we've had plenty.
A lot of those, a lot of comments.
Yeah, a lot of comments from anyone and everyone.
Yeah, I mean, just to keep it honey, keep it a buck, as we say. Like, prison has been designed off slavery. Period. That's since the inception of this country, slavery has been the key thing. Is what get people money. Prison is about money and money. Period. Right. That's what it's about. The more people they can put in, the more money they can get. Right, and the less they can pay, the more money they can get. Period. Right. You got people in here working these PIA jobs, like on the street. On the street for these PIA jobs, these people are making tables. They're making tables, chairs, office chairs. They're making anything under the sun that you can name. That CDCR themselves is charging themselves like $600 for a chair that they just paid me 2 cents an hour to make, right? Or $1 at the highest to make, right? So it's a system, right, that's been going on for years. However, like Vince was saying, change doesn't start at the top, right? Change starts from grassroots, right? For me, getting out, right? All the good things that's been happening in my life didn't happen because the court intervened, right? It came from community, right? I'm not back in prison because I have people around me who is willing to see me succeed, who is investing in me to succeed. Like, the court doesn't get involved in that. And the court has been designed to prosecute, to sentence, to get rid of the issue, to get rid of the problem. That's what they've been designed. But you don't get rid of the problem by just locking someone up, right? So we need more. We need more of San Quentin, because because people get it twisted as to see, like they see, specifically out here. You see on the news, you see all the great things that San Quentin is doing, right? You got the DA coming in, you got DAs coming in, you got all these free staff coming in, you got a bunch of people coming in helping out these incarcerated people to get better, right? But that's just Quentin, right? You got prisons specifically in California are on the off-beaten path.
36 of them.
And there's 36 of them. They're in the off-beaten path where ain't nobody driving 4-5 hours in the hot sun, and where ain't nobody driving all the way out there to be talking to no prisoners.
Yeah.
Like, but that was designed though, and the only people that work in them prisons is people who live in them communities. So it's advantageous to keep these prisons open, because if the prison shut down, the city shuts down, right? So it's a bunch of things that go into it. But just to get directly to your question, we have to start from the bottom. Like Madam DA, and she's starting from the bottom. Like, she said something, right? I'm gonna get this out, because if I don't get this out, y'all gonna look. She said something about coming in and not being trusted, right? I was one of the key ones. I ain't trust this lady for nothing in the world. I wouldn't trust her as far as I could throw her at one point, right? When she first came in, I told her I thought she was the devil's wife, right? So understand how deep, but it's because I
literally told me that.
I literally told her that, but it's because I fell into all the stuff that they were saying about her on TV until I actually met her and saw that she is who she says she is, right? So more people need to be listening to what she's saying and actually following her lead, because it's going to help change the prisons, right? Like, she just went into Chowchilla, like beaten path. It's horrible there, right? But she would have never knew that. In her mind, she probably thought all the prisons was like quitting until you go and see, like, but we need more Madam DAs like this one. We need more community, like he was saying, more community involvement in how to change the prison. Because can't nobody tell you how to change prisons but the people who have actually been to prison. We know what it means to what's needed to help the victims, because we either were victims or caused someone to be a victim, right? So why not talk to those who have been impacted about how to change the things that you say you care about, which is public safety.
And if I can just add something to that, Madam DA alluded to it earlier about the disproportionality of sentences across California. So I was sentenced in Santa Clara County. Santa Clara County, at the time, 2009, there was the African-American population was 2.6%. However, it made up 27% of the third strikers coming out of that county. I've been incarcerated with people who have 160 years, 120 years in different counties throughout California. And the first question that comes to my mind is, why is it so disproportionate throughout the state for the same crime? African Americans make up 45 to 50% of third strikers in California. I looked at statistics, I think yesterday or earlier today. The city that has the lowest percentage for sentencing people to three strikes was San Francisco. And others upwards of over 161. So it has to start on the ground, but like Madam DA said, the people who are in position to make change. It's the only way it's going to happen.
I know we have a bunch of questions to get into, but this is a big one because, I remember learning my freshman year at Cal about the prison industrial complex, right? And that's essentially what, Dante touched on, and learning then that, right, prisons produce so much of the furniture that even our public schools use, that they charge far more. The state charges far more than what it can be purchased for wholesale. I mean, just learning, right, about all that as an 18-year-old. And understanding now, right, we are in a position where we have to address the fact that they are making 25 cents an hour. Why? Why are they making 25 cents an hour for a job that we would pay anyone else $20 an hour to do? Why don't we pay them something more dignified, put that money away for them, so that when they are released, they're on the right footing rather than handing them a $200 check and saying good luck, right? Treating them as they should be treated, allowing them to be able to pay for the food that they want to buy inside and not putting that burden on their families. When we talk about programming, yes, San Quentin is the epitome of, what all prisons, I guess, should be in a way when we talk about programming, not other things, but no other prison in the state is like that. Why are we not holding ourselves accountable to ensure that regardless of where you get assigned, that you have the same opportunities to rehabilitate yourself as the person who's lucky enough to be in San Quentin? But these are all systemic things it's built that way so that it is a revolving door, so that people can't get out, so that even when they do, they end up cycling back in, because that's the way that this system was built, and needing to be transparent about that. And it's okay to be transparent about that as the DA, you need to be, but then understanding now how we work on a legislature that needs to be implementing the changes to make it better. Because I can't do that on my own. I would love to snap my fingers and make it different, but it requires laws to be changed. Sometimes we have to legislate these things, in order to ensure that there's fairness and human rights are observed. But those are the things that have to happen in this system.
Yeah, and it's interesting kind of given the California model. I know one of the critiques that happened earlier on was that people said, oh, San Quentin already has all this great programming and so many other prisons don't. So really interesting to keep in mind. We were discussing a little about some of the disparities, some of the shock at the sentence lengths and things like that. I'm curious, District Attorney, if you could talk about some of the sentencing and enhancement practices that you've observed, and if there are any reforms or changes that you feel most passionately about.
Oh boy. The way that our symposiums start off is that everybody gets in a circle, all of the staff from my office and all of the residents that attend. And usually there's about 30 to 40 residents per symposium that attend, and they start off by saying their name, what they were convicted of, what their sentence was, what county they're from, and how long they've been incarcerated. And we start going around the circle, the first symposium that we did, and I'm like, attempted murder, 174 years.
Yeah, you should have seen her face when she.
How does that work? Okay. And we would go around and it'd be like another story of like, and I'm like, I've been doing this a long time. I can't do the math. Like, how did they even get to that number? And I remember going up to a particular gentleman after the symposium was over, and I said, can you just help me understand? And he had gotten 174 years to life for an attempted murder, a drive-by shooting. And I said, can you explain to me like how you got that number? And he could rattle it off, right? And most of that were gun enhancements, because there were three victims that he shot at, and what I learned was how these counties are stacking gun enhancements over, on top of each other to get to these crazy numbers for people who are, I think he was 20 when he was convicted. And so realizing like, oh wait, I live in a bubble. I work in a bubble in San Francisco because we don't do that. And I think it took me out of that bubble, of the way that we have done things for some time here, that is not at all the way that it's done around the state, and needing to, again, figure out how we constrain, sadly, the discretion that DAs have to engage in these types of sentencing practices. And that's really controversial, in my world, amongst my colleagues to say, right? I believe in prosecutorial discretion, but at the same time, there have to be limits to prevent its abuse. And those were the things that were highlighted to me, and that I am in the beginning stages of trying to map out, how we can, again, change laws or do whatever we need to ensure that that's not happening. The other mechanism that I'm using, though, is I don't want to be the only DA that spends a lot of time in prison. I want my colleagues to do the same. And so I need them to buy in to the fact that we need to make some of these adjustments so that they don't create, a lot of opposition either. And plus, I just want you to, I hope the culture in DA's offices around this country changes. And so we held the first ever last May elected DA symposium inside San Quentin, where I actually invited every elected DA in the state to come for that symposium. We got about 13 that showed up. I think we had 17 offices represented, but actually 13 electeds showed up, including LA, which has the largest prison population, so that they could sit next to people like these two and see for themselves, oh, people can change, right? I don't have to see it as us versus them. Humanize them, because so many lawyers in my office say, all we get is the case, and I see them in court. We're not allowed by law to talk to them unless their lawyer gives us a mitigation packet, right, that says things about their life and their upbringing or how they got here. Oftentimes, we don't know anything about them than what's on the police report. And then the case is over once they're sentenced. So this is the only opportunity that we get to have conversation, right, when you come in post-conviction. And so needing to help other DAs realize that their practices are a problem, right, and introducing them to the people who have those, in my view, egregious sentences, and questioning them about, does that sound right to you? Does that logically make sense to you that this is what we're engaged in? And so those are the things that I'm thinking about, though, is like how we figure out, again, how to minimize those types of situations.
Yeah, no, it's crazy to think you don't really get to know much about the people that you're kind of dealing with. Yeah, so kind of going off of that, Dante and Vincent, I'm curious to get your thoughts on, when a person is incarcerated to get out in terms of parole and resentencing, how is that sort of balanced with, what the, victims' voices being honored, and also what all are you doing to sort of prove that and demonstrate that you are not a public safety risk? I think public safety is a word we all hear a lot these days. How do we gauge that? How do we manage that? How do we think about that? And yeah, kind of intersecting with both victims and then obviously for yourself seeking potentially parole or resentencing.
Well, I don't think it's a monolith, right? We all like to believe that, everyone's path to I got a problem with rehabilitation. I like to say reform, because how can you be rehabilitated when you was never rehabilitated to begin with? But that's another conversation for another day. Like everyone, it's not a monolith. Everybody has their own path to reforming themselves, right? Every victim or survivor has their own path to either forgiveness or non-forgiveness for the rest of their life, right? So it's situational, right? And the legal system has to come at it situational. The legal system doesn't come at it situational. It's what they say, by the book, right? This is what's in the penal code. This is what you get, right? This is what the parole board says that you have to do in order, this is the game you have to play in order to get out. So this is what you got to do, right? So no one really cares. As far as systematically, no one really cares whether you're rehabilitated or not. They want you to play the game, right? They want you to say what you need to say, and then if you said it right, they'll let you out in the boardroom, right? Or if you can show, it's rare for guys like myself, Vince, who actually did, and it's a few brothers in this audience, right? Who actually did the work and was blessed enough to have people in place to see our rehabilitation and actually let us free, right? Usually that don't happen. Like, you got guys in there that deserve to been out way before we got out, right? And still in there. Mm-hmm. Because you have people who see it one way and don't want to see it any other way but the way the law says you should see it, right? So until we start changing the culture of how we prosecute, how we sentence, how we judge, et cetera, there's not going to be too much change, right? And in California, there's always a swinging of the pendulum. when it comes to, you know, whether you're gonna be about reform or rehabilitation or you're gonna be lock them up forever, right? We swinging back to that lock them up forever side, right? So, you know, I don't know how, there's no real like core answer to your question, Emily, because we dealing with human beings here, right? And like, people believe what they believe, and until you do like what the DA said, you know, bring people in, right? Because the prosecutors have the biggest power in their hand. They're the gatekeepers, right? They decide who comes in and who gets out, right? So it's like you have to start with them first, if anything, right, to change their mindset. Because a lot of times they're taught from the gate, from law school, they're taught the criminal is a criminal, right? You lock him up, that's it. Or you lock her up, if they did wrong, ain't no talking about what led up to that person doing what they do. The law says that they committed a murder or whatever the crime is, so you need to prosecute in that aspect. They don't teach you the human side. So I don't know if you want to, I don't know. Like, there's no real tough. Maybe he can have a better answer. I don't know. There's no real answer to that question.
I don't think I have a better answer, but I do have an answer. So I think what most people in society and in the district attorney's office should understand is that most victimizers were once victims themselves,
Yeah.
right? And to understand that, a person would be able to better navigate this scheme in the judicial system that over sentences people. You know, I think I spoke with the DA once about, and she alluded to it, get rid of that gap between victimizer, public defender, and the DA's office. There is a law that says the district attorney cannot have a conversation with the victim, the victimizer, or the defendant, let's say. So if you take that barrier out of there, then it gives the office of the people a better understanding of the people. You know, with that barrier in there, you cannot, all you can do is judge by what you see on paper. And 9 times out of 10, what you see on paper is not the person that's on the other side of that table from the district attorney. Right.
And let me say this. Let's just get this on the table right now. A lot of people need to be in prison. Let's just do that. So let's not make this seem like this is just a forum where we're up here saying, oh, you know, be soft on the prisoner, on the inmate, you know, let them all out. Look, some people, I was in 17 years. Some people deserve to be in there. Let's just say that, right? Don't ever let them out, right? Because if you do, it's bad for the world, right? But what Vince is saying is that for the most part, 90%, I might be short on the numbers, but 90% of the people that are incarcerated will one day be your neighbor, right? Understand that, right? So if that person is getting out and going to be your neighbor, like that person, don't you want that person to get out so that you can maybe one day invite them to the barbecue? Right? Like, you know, people because they're incarcerated, they like to eat meat too, right? So I'm just saying, I'm just saying. But so just understand that we have to come with a human side to this incarceration, right? People make mistakes, but they are not their mistakes, right? And once we start approaching it from that aspect, life will be a whole lot better when it comes to this incarceration and this, like, you know, criminal stuff. So, yeah, I just wanted to.
And if I could just add to the conversation that I had with Vincent, you know, I've had multiple people, at San Quentin ask me about the adversarial nature of the relationship between public defenders and prosecutors, and not understanding that there's even the option of having mitigating material offered to DAs to be considered. Many of these guys didn't even know that that was like something that their lawyer had the option to do. And I've been in a position over my career where I've had to say, hey, can you give me something about your client? Because there's something to this, like, I don't think they got here because like their life was perfect. Like, give me their background. And we've toyed with the idea of, should that be required, like by law, that they give it? I mean, there's all kinds of things that, sadly, I don't want to have to legislate the world. We're already a state that like over legislates, but trying to, short of that, have a dialogue where prosecutors and defense lawyers come to the agreement that this is about the person. Public defenders are always going to take the position that every client should be out, right? Okay, fine. But at the end of the day, a part of the conversation should center around, who is this person? Because even if let's say it's a murder, even if I say, no matter what you give me, they're going to have to go to prison. They killed someone. What it does is impact how long I believe that they should have to go, right? What it does is help me understand, right, what level of danger do they pose going forward, outside of just the facts of the murder. And I think far too frequent, we are given that mitigation. That needs to be something that is more built in. And I don't just mean like your mom writes a letter saying, my son is the greatest person alive. Like that's not the way either. Like, it is literally, I want to know what this person went through, because I would say 50% of the men that I have talked to inside have been the victims of neglect, sexual abuse, physical child abuse. I mean, you name it, have witnessed loved ones be murdered as children. Like, the amount of trauma inside of that institution would blow your mind. But it helps you understand why they don't have empathy. So many of them will explain, like, I was victimized to the point that I lost empathy for anyone else, and therefore all I did was inflict pain on others. Well, that's something we need to know before we enter into a disposition in a case. And so often we are not provided that level of depth. It's the surface, which is, again, your mom saying that you were a great kid. And I'm like, well, he just killed someone. I'm sure Johnny was great, but like, tell me about Johnny.
Absolutely. We could keep this conversation going for hours. We have about 15 minutes left, so I do want to turn now to some of the audience questions. Y'all gave me a lot. I can sadly not pick all of them, but here are a couple that I think are, spicy and interesting. So this first one will be kind of a rapid fire question for each of you. Someone in the audience asked, if you had the ability to make one critical change to the criminal justice system, what would it be and why? So I don't know if anyone
Take
is
the
ready.
power out of the district attorney's hands.
So who are we giving it to?
Starting off hot with that. Yeah.
No, if there's one thing to change.
If you could change one thing in the criminal justice.
I'll answer while he
Yeah.
thinks. I would say to the use of enhancements that there needs to be an immediate limit on how they are administered.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Equality across the board from different states. In different cities and counties. The sentencing equality. If someone receives 5 years in San Francisco County, they shouldn't receive 30 years or 60 years in Orange County.
I've said this before. I think that the state needs to find a way to reduce the workload of the DAs, right? Because for the most part, like DA and for public defenders as well, right? Because at any given time, a DA and a public defender could have like 1,000 men and women on their caseload, right? So it becomes the dehumanization just becomes synced in. Like you just trying to get this stuff off your plate, right? You got 1,000 people you got to send in front of the judge, right? So maybe you need to start, all this money that the state is giving, you need to start allocating it towards hiring more public defenders and DAs so they can take the caseloads off. Because look, crime is always going to happen. Look, man,
We hope not.
we in America, in California, crime is always going to happen, right? So since we understand that we're not going to get away from crime, we have to find a way to tackle it, which is mean like, since you're always going to have crime, that means you're always going to have a public defender, you're always going to have DAs, right? We need more public defenders, we need more DAs, and then we need the culture to shift within those systems so that they can, once again, they can look at it from a human standpoint. Once you start looking at it from a human standpoint and start dealing with community on how to deal with the situation, you get better outcomes, right? So, if you just, it's just a caseload.
No, for sure, for sure. So this question is interesting. Someone asked Dante and Vincent, many people watch television shows or movies and think that they know what prisoners go through. What are some of the biggest misconceptions that you wish the public would know?
All right, I might get in trouble for this, but I'm gonna say it. Look,
Had to pick the spicy ones.
I'm gonna get in trouble for that. I'm gonna say it anyway. Look, not everybody in prison is having sex with each other. I'm just gonna say that, right? Not everyone in prisons is just a hard monster, taking people's commissary. Does it happen? Yes. Unfortunately, it happens, man. But we watch these prison TV shows and you're either raping somebody, taking somebody's property, or you're doing something criminal with the people that work there. No, that's not prison. Does it happen? Yes, but it's not the norm of prison. So I don't know. Yeah, that's what irritates my soul, as my wife says.
We cleared that one up. Yeah.
For me, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that we are treated better than people on the streets.
Yeah.
Oh.
I hear that a lot.
No, they're not.
Oh, they treat prisoners better than they treat us.
Yeah.
Don't believe that. Please don't believe that.
Nope.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
You're not being told to go use the bathroom, or I need to unlock this door for you to go use the restroom. I'll wake you up at 5 o'clock in the morning for you to go eat, but you only have 5 minutes to do so. So no, we were not treated better than those of you on the streets.
Yeah, and the opposition would say, right, okay, well, you committed a crime, you deserve what you get, right? But I always tell people who think like that, please be humble, because you're one mistake away from the penitentiary. Everyone sitting in here, understand, but if you don't take anything from this forum, take this from this forum. You're one mistake away from prison, right? Me and Vince have seen people who have silver spoons in their mouth, never understand how you get to prison. You in prison, right? So then when you're in prison, you want that same type of empathy, that same type of sympathy, that same type of humanization that you wasn't given that person that you said deserves to be in prison and deserves all the bad treatment he or she is given because they're in prison. So, I'll just say that,
Yeah.
Don't make a mistake.
Yeah, well, this kind of goes into this next question, which I'm actually going to combine two of these. And it's sort of a question for all of the speakers, which is, what do you think is the most effective way of preventing crimes from occurring in the first place? Is it job opportunities? Is it youth and teenage intervention programs? And what about for those who do not respond well to those types of programs who have been growing up when they only knew violence during years of huge brain development? How do you kind of intervene in that cycle?
I don't know how we answer that in rapid fashion.
Yeah, you can't.
May I tackle that
question.
one? I think I mentioned this to you once before, Madam DA. I think it starts with the children at a very young age, teaching them empathy for others. If you grow up with empathy, you don't have crime. You don't have bullying. You don't have things that negativity the negativity that we grow up with. We don't, I mean, you still may have the family traumas in there, but you have to teach the babies. It starts with the babies.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that is a, resounding theme inside of San Quentin, like I said, that there is a developed lack of empathy, and they never had, because of the traumas, and they never had anything within the system that you come up in school or anywhere else that taught it. And so now they're in there learning it and identifying that they had a lack of empathy, but it's obviously after they've landed in prison. I would say that most people think that it's socioeconomic, right? I hear, and I think for a while I thought that too, that it's a matter of like, just give people more money and that'll solve the problem in their lives. But it's so much deeper than that. Yes, I think we tend to have more of these issues that I'm gonna highlight in a second we have them across the board in our society, but I feel like there are less resources poured into it for more economically depressed communities. But again, going back to so many of these men and women, when I go to, when I've been to Chowchilla, talking about sexual abuse, child abuse, and neglect, having parents who were on drugs, right? Having all the things that were happening. And nope, the system failures started very early, right? We always identify system failures for once people are incarcerated or the criminal justice system. All these failures started when they were 5, right? That they were in school and clearly showing signs that there was something wrong, and no teacher took the time to say, what's going on? Why do you have those marks on you? Why are you acting out? Why do you seem overly hungry? Whatever it might be, Child Protective Services either are never contacted, or even if they are, these kids are left in these situations, right? Understanding that parents are having either drug issues or whatever it might be, none of these problems are being solved early on. And, I've even had the idea, like, let's take the public school administrators, let's take CPS, let's take, DCYF, let's take all these entities that are responsible for rescuing these children out of the situations that are causing the trauma so that they don't end up on a pipeline into the system, right? When we talk about school to prison pipeline, it's not just the education. I can't be educated if every day I go home to being abused, if every day I go home to my molester, if every day I go home and nobody's feeding me because mom is on dope. You could give me the best teacher in the world. I'm not in a position to learn. I'm traumatized every day. And so needing to fix that part of the system so that, I've had guys where I've asked, like, would you have wanted to be removed from your house? Like, most kids wouldn't want to be removed, but some of them saying, that's the only thing that possibly could have saved me. Get me out of there. Right? Parents who are gang members and they're seeing all kinds of stuff. We have to identify it early and flood the resources into fixing a lot of these issues. And I think we would avoid a lot of people ending up in these facilities.
Yeah, Dante, any thoughts before we?
She laid it out nicely. Yes, all this what you're speaking on, like I was one of those kids, right? I mean, I had a great mother who did the best she could to raise a son as a single mother, right? But for a lot of times, specifically when dealing with men, since there's incarcerated men that's on this stage, a lot of times, we don't have, the only male figures that we have to look up to are the ones that's in the streets. Like I said, my conflict resolution growing up, all I knew was violence. Right? You get into an argument with a fellow friend. How y'all figure it out? You go, you put your fists up, right? And then it escalated to guns and things of that nature, right? So it's what we knew, right? When he said, most of us was victims before we became the victimizer, right? In my situation, my victim was my victimizer, right? However, it's like this is what we knew. It wasn't his fault nor my fault. This is what we grew up in. This is how we knew how to solve our problems, right? So if we're not taught any other way, it's kind of like asinine to think that, right, since I wasn't taught how to cope with my feelings, since I wasn't taught how to express how I'm feeling other than through violence, what else do you expect for me to do? You want to put me in jail for life because I did something that I was trained to do, right? That's like growing up a baby to be an assassin its entire life. All it knows is how to kill people. You ain't teach them nothing else, empathy, nothing. You just kill people, right? But you know that it's crazy to just kill people, so you sentence him or her to life in prison for doing what it was trained to do. Now they looking at you like, what are you talking about? All I knew is how to kill people. This is what I taught. You telling me this is wrong my whole life? But no one's teaching the children. So you gotta start, like he said, you gotta start with the kids, man. Because once you get to a certain level in life, that's what you know, and you're gonna act out what you've been taught. If you can catch them early and show them a different way early, it'll be a different outcome. But
Yeah, well, that is kind of a heavy but also positive note, I think, to end on. We are basically out of time, unless I get a signal that I can keep asking questions. But I want to please give a round of applause to our panelists. Yes, thank you so much to District Attorney Brooke Jenkins, Dante D. Jones, and Vincent O'Bannon. And so for any other information about the Commonwealth Club World Affairs membership and upcoming programs, please visit commonwealthclub.org. And thank you again. I'm Emily Hoven. Hope you all have a great night, and take care, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.